Hello, everyone. I'm Nate Truex, and you're listening to the Croccast Podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Croccast Podcast. I'm your host, Nate, and today I'm joined by Dr. Steve Platt. Steve, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here, Nate. Thanks for having me on.
So Steve, mind telling us how you first got into reptiles and crocodilians, and what was your career path up to your point now?
Oh, it was kind of long and twisted. It certainly wasn't a linear path. But today I work for a wildlife conservation society in Southeast Asia, and I actually got involved with them. I've always been interested in reptiles, turtles. I grew up in South Louisiana, and I wanted to do my dissertation research in Belize on Morlet's crocodile, and Wildlife Conservation Society funded me. And so I went to Belize for 4 years. I worked there off and on, different aspects of the biology of the crocodile. And after I graduated, I guess I did a good job. And they hired me to go back and work on American crocodiles offshore. So I did that. I was there for another year, almost 2 years. And then after that, they hired me to come to Southeast Asia. And so I started working in Southeast Asia in 1998. And I worked here until 2001, until right about 9/11. At that point, I kind of realized, travel was going to get difficult. And I'd been in the field, working in the field for, quite a while. So I figured I'd go into academics. And so I did that. And then in the meantime, a lady that I met when I was working in Myanmar, we decided to get married. And she was also working for Wildlife Conservation Society. And so then we spent I was in academics for 10 years. And we spent another, basically about half of that time. We got married in 2004, trying to get back to Asia. And so eventually, Turtle Survival Alliance hired my wife in 2011 to work in Myanmar on turtle conservation, and they're our partner organization. We have different bosses, but we still report to the same people, and so they hired me at the same time. Wildlife Conservation hired me at the same time, not only to work in Myanmar but also to work in other countries in the region. So yeah, I've been here since 2011. I was based in Myanmar for years until until the coup happened in 2021. I had to leave then, and I've been either in Cambodia, based in Cambodia, or Laos since then.
Okay. And in Laos and Cambodia, what's the primary species you work with for conserving?
I work with a number of species. In Cambodia, it's turtle. For the most part, it's turtles. We work with the southern river terrapin, Batagira finis, and we also work with the what's the common name of it? The Asian giant soft-shell turtle, the Pelopellis canteri, which is really in crisis. In fact, I'm going to give a presentation at the TSA conference. These numbers have just crashed in a period of about 3 years, and we finally worked out the husbandry. We've got them, we've got a really good guy in our that's responsible for the husbandry. They're extremely difficult to get them to feed, and there's all sorts of logistic challenges. But that's what I do here. In Laos, I mostly do Siamese crocodile work. We have a really successful community conservation program that's been going off and on since 2011. We got it started. We had all sorts of problems, and then the donor withdrew funding when did that happen? 2013, I believe. And so we had to get some emergency funding because we were head starting animals. And then we got it started going again in 2019. And then, of course, COVID hit. But now we're kind of up and running. We've been having really good success with that. It's possibly one of the largest. I think, based on what's been published, I think it's the largest Siamese crocodile population in the world. And it's not in a protected area. It's in a wetland. Just happens to be the communities around there, have all these religious beliefs that involve the crocodiles, and that's why they're still there. They've been pretty much extirpated everywhere else.
Okay. So with the uh, giant soft shells, what's the primary threat to their continuing survival? Is it like habitat loss, hunting, or other sort of pressure from humans, or
Yeah, that's a good question because we're really not sure. Um, we get them. We work with them on the Mekong River, and it's a huge, it's a massive river, one of the largest in Asia, one of the largest rivers in the world. And there is, impacts. There's sand dredging, and there's hydropower development, which of course then alters the hydrology of the river. But we were getting around 65, up to 65 nests a year. And in 2023 or 2022, that dropped down to about 10 nests. And so we're thinking, well, it may just be, some environmental factor, it was a hot year or whatever. Well, then next year, the same thing happened again. And we've seen that every year since then. I think we got 13 nests this year, but basically we went from 65 to 10 to 13 nests. We think that there's a big illegal trade in these turtles, and we have a lot of anecdotes. It's not in the open, and investigating, illegal wildlife trafficking is extremely difficult. I mean, we're not police, we don't have any law enforcement training. Although we have a program, a counter wildlife trafficking program in Southeast Asia, but that's not, we're biologists, but we've gotten a lot of anecdotal information. It seems to indicate there is trade in this. I don't hesitate to call it trade because trade is legal. There's a lot of illegal trafficking in this species. We think they're going into Vietnam to be sold on the sold high-end restaurants and stuff.
okay? You mentioned that it's kind of hard to figure out their husbandry, but you guys have. Can you tell me anything about the key found to unlock their husbandry?
Yeah, well, we had worked with I don't even know what the common name of it is. It's Amida ornata. One of the used to be there is broken up as Amida cartilaginea, and it got broken off. But they're very easy. They're like keeping soft shell turtles in the States. You just chop up some fish and throw it in there, and they'll come out and feed them. And we work with those in Laos as well. We have a small project where we're propagating those. But these turtles, the Amida come out and walk around and they swim. They come out at night. You can see them swimming. These Pelecheles just bury themselves in the sand almost immediately. It's amazing. Even the hatchlings just disappear. All you can see is their eyes. If you look closely, you'll see their eyes in the sand, and they wait until prey go by and then stick their head out and grab it. And they seem to have living prey. And, you can cut up fish and put it right in front of them, and they just ignore it. They seem to have it pass, they seem to need living prey. And they only take prey of a certain size. So when they first come out of an egg, they're not much bigger than a quarter. And so you've got to have tiny fingerling fish, and getting those fingerlings is difficult. And, we can buy fish fingerlings, but you're feeding basically the smallest of the fingerlings you can get. And once you're in there, we keep them in these plastic tubs with shallow sand where they can bury themselves in. And you have to herd the fish over in front of the turtles to make sure they eat. And once they get going, and they also have to, they don't seem to have much in the way of yolk reserves, fat reserves, internalized yolk. And so we have to get them from the Mekong, move them by boat to this larger town. And then from there, it's a 2-day drive to our head starting center. And you've got to get them feeding and in captivity within about 5 days. After that, they burn up their yolk, their internalized yolk so quickly, they just go downhill. And so the first year, we had very poor success. I'm about 90% of what we tried to rear died. But then the following year, about 90% of them survived. So we've kind of figured out all these little things and developed this protocol where the minute they hatch out, we get them off the river. That's a day right there. And then, we have somebody go up and pick them up in the truck, bring them back to Phnom Penh. That's an all day there. And then from Phnom Penh, we drive down to our center in southwestern part of Cambodia and then begin the husbandry process there. But all has to go smoothly. And invariably, these things hatch out tend to hatch out during the holiday, which happened last year. And so nobody wants to work on a holiday. And so then they sit up there, and then we got to get them back. But like I say, we're having really good success for the past couple of years. We're getting about 10% increase in body mass every 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. So they seem to be doing quite well. They're still difficult to keep. It's very time intensive, but we know what to do now.
Okay. So it sounds like once you do get them feeding, it doesn't take too long for them to start sizing up their prey, hopefully.
Yeah, and once they get bigger, we can feed larger prey, which are larger, which are easier for us to get. We don't go out and catch fish fingerlings. We can't catch them in quantity. We have to buy them from aquaculture facilities. And so, once we get them to grow quickly, and then we can start. Then the food is actually easier for us to procure and get them to feed.
Okay. And have you found their growth rate to change over the course of the years you've had started them, or do they kind of constantly have that high growth rate for the first few years of life?
Well, we haven't been doing this. 2022 was kind of a failure. So this is our third year, and we're going into our third year right now. And so, they seem after year two, they still grow pretty quickly. It's these things now are some of the older ones we have are dinner plate size. And they do seem to slow down a little. The growth slows down. But, if we can get them up to dinner plate size, what we're going to do is release, a portion of them back into the river. We'll head start them. But we're going to keep some and develop our own breeding facility. But that's down the road. We don't know how long it takes them to reach sexual maturity, but based on some other comparably sized turtles, it's got to be at least 10 years, 10 or maybe even 15 years.
Okay. And when you say giant, just how big do adults of this species get?
I'm not really sure. I'd have to look that up, and I don't know if anybody knows. They get massive. I mean, probably fill the bed of a pickup truck up. Some of the really large ones.
Yeah, pretty impressive turtle, to say the least.
They are, and they're really neat. They're not good for if you were like in a zoo or an aquarium, you put them in there, all they do is sit buried in the sand. But once you care for them and observe them, their life histories, I find it very interesting.
Okay, want to tell us a little bit more about their life history?
Well, we don't know much about it. That's the thing about Asian turtles in general is we just don't know. There's so many basic facts that we draw a blank on. In fact, a lot of the work I should have mentioned earlier, even though I don't live in Myanmar anymore, I'm still, actively involved with our program there. And we work with Burmese star tortoises, Burmese roof turtles, big-headed turtles. Those are our principal species, and the Minoria emys, fayeri. But the standard reference work that I use on those turtles is Malcolm Smith's 1931, The Reptiles of British India, Burma, and Ceylon. And that's all that's really. And there's been work, we've published quite a few studies on our work, but that's all that's out there. Same for turtles in Laos and like turtles in Laos, for instance. My colleague Brian Stewart, who's now at the museum in North Carolina, he's probably about the only person that's published published a number of papers on turtles in Laos. It's just it's the same in Cambodia. There's very little information on these species, and just we don't some of these turtles, we don't even know how many eggs, what's the range in clutch size they lay. So as far as, what we do know about Pelecheles is they can attain large body sizes. They live in big rivers. Sometimes there are some reports of them being in estuaries where the water is brackish, and they nest in the dry season. They nest on sandbanks. And they lay fairly large numbers of eggs. I can't offhand, I don't recall the average clutch size, but it's up around something like 30 or 40 eggs, small eggs, but a large number of them. And we know I think the incubation period, I want to say, is around 65, 70 days. Of course, it varies depending on temperature. And my guess is they probably don't have temperature dependent sex determination. But yeah, that's, we don't, they're ambush predators. I suspect they eat a lot of, they eat a lot of fish, but whether they eat like mollusks, or plants. We were having this discussion the other day where we were like, maybe we should be offering them plants in the enclosures. And, but we don't know that. You would think they stay buried most of the time, but maybe they come out and go foraging. So yeah, we don't, that we just kind of have this barest of outline, of the life history of of a lot of these species.
Okay. As adults, I'm guessing they're so large they don't have any natural predators other than humans.
Yeah, once they reach up a certain size, probably some populations are subject to crocodile predation. And I have seen some video on YouTube of tigers in India. And I believe there's a report in Thailand of soft-shell turtle remains turning up in tiger feces. But I saw on YouTube it wasn't a Pellicheles. I don't think it was. It was taking a difference. Tiger coming out of a stream holding a huge soft shell. So yeah, tigers, probably one, but of course tigers are almost extinct. Certainly none left in Cambodia, Vietnam, or Laos. So yeah, I don't think at this point, that's not a serious predator. So yeah, crocodiles and tigers are probably about the only thing that would ever take an adult soft shell.
All right. So you want to talk a little bit about the species of turtles you were working with in Myanmar?
Yeah, sure. In fact, I think, some of our major conservation success stories were in Myanmar. And the two principal species we put a lot of time and effort into were, first of all, were the Burmese star tortoise, Geochelone platinota. And that tortoise went extinct in the wild. We went there when I was working for WCS in 1998, 1999. We actually found them in the wild. There was a couple of places they were fairly common. But then there was this trade of turtles going into China, and the international pet markets discovered them, and they were just vacuumed out. In 2001, this wildlife sanctuary, we couldn't even, where we had found them in 1999, we couldn't find a single one. And I'm sure there were, there were one or two here and there, but not viable populations. And fortunately, a number of these tortoises had been confiscated from traffickers, and they were held by the government in Myanmar, the Forest Department. And so we set up, it was Wildlife Conservation Society and Turtle Survival Alliance helped set up a captive breeding program. And my wife will disagree with you. She doesn't like to take credit for things. But you can look at the production of that facility. We started out with roughly, as far as I can tell, about 175 tortoises. And for years, for a good 8 or 9, 10 years, the production just kind of sputtered along. We have a few eggs here. Some of them hatch out, 10, 20 here and there. My wife got there in 2011 and kind of took charge of the program. And between 2011, 2012, 2013, you just see almost an exponential growth curve. They just started, breeding, just doing some basic things. And right now, I don't know today how many we have. I couldn't give you an exact number, but we have about 14,000 of them in captivity. So, and we've released a lot of them in the wild. We started a very successful reintroduction program at this small wildlife sanctuary. We basically just wanted to figure out how to do it. We did some soft release pens, and we got them there. And then we moved to a bigger wildlife sanctuary, and we started, it's huge. It's about 40,000 hectares. So that's 80,000 acres. But it's one of the largest tracts of deciduous forest left in Myanmar. And, so we started there, we had some problems with predators, mostly wild pigs and jackals. But we got them going, and they were doing really well there. And then we moved into a third wildlife sanctuary. We were just getting started there when COVID hit. And then after COVID, we started getting it going. Unfortunately, then there was this coup in Myanmar in February 1st, 2021. And now that much of the country's involved in a civil war, and so we can't work. We had to quit working in that third wildlife sanctuary. It's just too dangerous. We can't have people out in the field, get risk getting bombed or something. So we pulled out of there. We're still working at the other two wildlife sanctuaries, but even there, it's quite difficult. Because the guerrillas control. You move away from the headquarters, and that minute you go into the forest, there are guerrillas, potentially guerrillas. They're not going to bother us. But we have to, the people we work with are government staff. And so they're de facto the enemy. And so we have to be concerned for them. So what we've been doing, rather than releasing head started tortoises, we've been doing egg translocations where we take, we have these assurance colonies, with thousands of tortoises on them. And so we dig up the eggs as soon as they're laid, and we take them back into the wildlife sanctuary, and we bury them. We just make a nest and bury them and let them hatch naturally and disperse naturally. Now, you figure most of those tortoises aren't going to survive. Probably, under natural conditions, 90% of those, baby tortoises die. But when you can put 1,000 eggs out there, and you figure 100 of those survive to adulthood, that's a pretty significant, a number of tortoises you're getting back into the wild. So we've been doing that there, and both of those wildlife sanctuaries, we still, translocate eggs. But we, again, we can't evaluate that, like we can mark head started tortoises and put radio trackers on them and what. We can't do that with the hatchlings. So we're just kind of making some assumptions. And if they're, proven right, then, we're still putting significant numbers of tortoises out there.
Okay. And you mentioned two other species you worked with. The roof turtle was one, I believe.
Yeah, the Burmese roof turtle, Batagia trivitata, which is endemic. I should have mentioned too, the Burmese star tortoise is endemic to central Burma, and the roof turtle is also endemic to the major rivers in Myanmar. And we started working with those. They were rediscovered in 2001 when I was there. On one of my early trips, I found that we thought they were extinct. There was a big meeting in 1999, and we reviewed all the species in Southeast Asia. That was one of them. Nobody had heard about them since prior to World War II. None of them had turned up, and so they were declared extinct. And then one of them turned up in the animal markets in China. Somebody got a hold of it, and so then just happened to be in this village. And we had heard reports of these turtles that lay eggs that are like chicken eggs, big, they're river turtles. That's the only thing it could be. And sure enough, somebody had a shell of a female that they had found, or that they had found nesting and killed and eaten her. But we were able to verify the identity based on the shell. And then another guy, Gerald Kuchling, found a population on the Chinwen River in north central Myanmar. And so we had a nest protection program, and Gerald also found some turtles in pagoda ponds, and that's real common in Asia. All the pagodas will have like big ponds, and so you'll get a fish or a turtle and you'll release it in that pond, and you gain karmic merit. You've done a good deed by releasing it. People had put these turtles in there, no telling how long that they had been in there. And we were able to get those animals. I say we, Gerald was the one that did it with the help of Turtle Survival Alliance and WCS and the zoos and the Mandalay Zoo. And we started an assurance colony, a breeding group there, and very small of about, I think in total, I believe it was about 10 individuals. And nobody thought these are big river turtles. And people said, well, they're not going to breed in these ponds, this big, even though it's a fairly substantial lake. Sure enough, they started breeding. And so we were breeding them in captivity. And we were also collecting eggs from the wild, protecting the nest. We would get the eggs, hatch them out, and then head start the offspring. And so we were quite successful with that. Unfortunately, it looks like now the area where the sole surviving population is now, there was unregulated gold mining, and they're covering the beaches in mud. So as far as we can tell, that population, we haven't gotten any nests. We think it's probably extinct. But in the meantime, we've greatly expanded the captive population, which are now numbers over 1,000 individuals, and we've got 3 different captive populations that are breeding and producing offspring every year, and we're head starting those. Our problem now is what to do with all these offspring. We figured out how to breed them. It's very difficult getting them back into the wild because some of the places where we could do this again are a war zone where we just can't operate. So we're kind of in a holding pattern, right now with regards to a lot of our work in Myanmar. In fact, we just established a 4th assurance colony within the past few weeks at a wildlife park outside of Yangon. It's a big lake, and we'll build we built artificial beaches, sandbanks where they can nest. So, the species is not biologically extinct. And I feel like this is one of our conservation success stories, because if Gerald wouldn't have assembled that captive breeding group 25 years ago, they probably would be extinct by now. And so, but now getting them, the trick now is to get them out into the wild. But we've actually had turtles that we reared in captivity and used to found an assurance colony in 2010. And then in about 2020 or 2021, those turtles started nesting. So it takes about 13, 14 years for them to reach, the females anyway, to reach sexual maturity. So we've gone the full cycle, which is something of a conservation milestone. But again, the big hurdle now, the big challenge is to get them into the wild. Fortunately, they're very long-lived. They probably live longer than we do. And so, if we can just hold them in captivity, hopefully, something will develop later on. I often get criticized by donors. They want to know what your exit strategy is. And, to be honest, I don't have an exit strategy, especially for like these roof turtles. But, when you think about it, if passenger pigeons were not difficult to breed in captivity, if we would have, somebody would have had the foresight to breed passenger pigeons in captivity 125 years ago, now the eastern forests have come back. We could probably at least have that option of reintroducing them into the wild. So, I don't know where we're headed with these turtles, but at least we've got a secure population, multiple populations in captivity. So we've kept that option open, for the future. I mean, it may be my grandkids are the one that are doing the reintroduction, but at least they'll have those turtles that haven't, disappeared, gone to extinction. And
Yeah.
I think the other turtle, we actually work with we work with several other species. The other endemic we work with are the Arakan forest turtle, Siamese depressa, which is another one that I rediscovered in, when was that? In 1999. The last specimen, there are only a handful of specimens, had been collected in 1907. We weren't even really sure where they came from. The museum labels just said like Arakan, which is a huge region of Western Burma. And we went there, and the place you look, when you go in those places, you just look in the village garbage dump. Because if people have been eating turtles, they just throw the shells. Sometimes they'll have them around their huts. And we found the shells there, but it was another 10 years. It was 2010 when, 2009, when myself and another Burmese biologist, Ken Mew Mew, and I went into Arakan State, which is now Rakhine State, and went in the wet season. And we found, I've got a picture of her holding the first living Arakan forest turtle that any Western biologist, in living memory had seen. So, and they're hard to find in the dry season, and they're not easy to find in the wet season, but they do start moving. And I think they're relatively secure. It's a vast area. It's roadless, very difficult terrain. And in the wet season, what's the SEAL motto about no easy day? I've never been in Rakhine during the wet season and had an easy day. There's leeches, trench foot, rains incessantly, but that's when the turtles are moving. And we've actually been quite successful at breeding those in captivity. They only lay a few eggs at a time, and they produce very large eggs and very large offspring. They're not difficult to care for. But we had a fairly good captive breeding population set up. And then it was in the path of one of the rebel armies was coming through. And so pretty much almost at a moment's notice, we had to organize vehicles to go into that part of Myanmar and get those turtles out, and then take them out to near Yangon to another facility where we're keeping them today. There was a government forestry facility, and then right next door was an army base. And so sure enough, a few days after we got the turtles out, the army base was overrun by the rebels. And so, I don't think the rebels would consciously harm the turtles, but you don't want your turtles sitting on the middle of a battlefield. And the other one we work with are the big-headed turtles, platysternum and megacephalon. And those are a hot item now and being smuggled into China to stock. There's a loophole in Chinese law that allows turtle farmers to import those turtles into the country. And they're just being decimated throughout Southeast Asia. And so we were involved in several confiscations. And we ended up, one of them was terrible. It was one of the worst events of my career, when over 1,000 turtles were confiscated. They were in terrible shape. And most of them died. 85% of them, I think, died. And we had veterinarians there from the Bronx Zoo, Singapore Zoo, European zoos, turtle survival rights. It wasn't for lack of care. They were just in such terrible condition. I mean, it was just really heartbreaking. But the next year, there was just a few months later, it was 2016 and early 2017, there was another confiscation. Most of those turtles survived. So we used those turtles to form a captive breeding group. And we had planned to actually keep 100 of them and reintroduce the rest into the wild. But we have funds available to do that. But then the Civil War broke out. And again, the area we had selected to reintroduce is now, a hot conflict zone. We just can't work in there. So we're holding them and breeding. We have fairly good success there. We have a problem. We don't have electricity, or we don't have a reliable electricity there. So it's hard to, run incubators and stuff when you don't have electricity.
Yeah. Can you give a brief description of the some of the species, like the roof turtle? Is it get its name for like its carapace shape, or kind of what's the general description of them?
Yeah, they're very large river turtles, and the females can get up to have a carapace length of about 60 centimeters. I think 650 centimeters is the maximum size, and they're very heavy, solid bony shell. And yeah, they call it a roof turtle because the carapace is kind of arched, in the back. And they live in major rivers. The females are huge. They're grayish color. They're just nondescript, but the males are just brilliantly, green and black face. They're just beautiful animals, but they're tiny. They're not even half the size of those females. I don't know for sure, and I've been trying to get my guys to film the mating these turtles when they mate. But it seems to be that you'll get several males that pursue the female, and the female, it's the ball is in her court, and she selects the male she's going to breed with. That's what I think, based on the few fragments of video clips I've seen. But it makes sense given the size disparity between the two sexes. But they're just absolutely stunning. We wrote a monograph on them, and it's available online. It's published by the Chelonian Research Foundation, and there's a male on a photograph of the male on the cover. It's just there's a reason they put him on the cover and not the female. But it's just one of my favorite turtles. Just brilliant coloration. And the star tortoise, they're beautiful as well. They have these star patterns all over their carapace, which unfortunately that's been their undoing. They're such beautiful animals that people want them, will pay exorbitant amount of money to get them. Especially when they were very scarce. Most of them were smuggled in. We know tortoises are being smuggled because what we do is we inject microchips into all of them. We also mark them. We tattoo numbers and Burmese Buddhist icons onto the carapace to disfigure the animal make it less valuable, hopefully, but also so we can identify it. And I've seen them online offered for sale, and they always sand those tattoos away. But we inject microchips, and we also scoot clip. We have 3 marking systems, and we've had tortoises confiscated in both Thailand and China, and we've matched them up with the with the microchip number. So we know those were actually stolen. I mean, these assurance colonies of star tortoises look like a maximum security prison. They have a 15-foot fence topped with concertina wire, multiple locks on the gates, and we still were having tortoises stolen. And so now we have like people that sleep inside the pens at night. I mean, most of the thefts, I'm pretty sure, were inside jobs, but we could never prove it. But we know that they were being smuggled out, and then they're still in high demand. And I don't know why. It kind of baffles me because they're very easy to breed in captivity. Females breed multiple clutches. They'll have 5, 6 eggs, and they'll do that 3 or 4 times. That's why we've got 14,000 of them in captivity. And I don't really understand the economics behind it. And we often have this discussion, and I always hope to bring in somebody, that better understands economics than I do. But it just seems to me that a number of breeders producing large numbers of these things could flood the market and drive the price down. But I'm told that that's not how wildlife trafficking works. It generally, increases demand because people go out and see, Joe Blow's got this beautiful tortoises. Now I got to have one. So I don't know. I'm just putting that out there, but I'd love, it just seems to me produce enough of them, flood the market, drive the price down. There's plenty in captivity, and why pay somebody to go out into the wild and poach them? So
yeah, it's kind of a weird math formula to figure out when do you reach market saturation point that they're no longer worth all the trouble of smuggling.
Exactly. I mean, here there were cases we heard of villagers getting paid $600 for a tortoise, an adult tortoise. You can buy a water buffalo for that much. That's almost a yearly income, of some of these rural villagers. So, I mean, you can't, I always think, well, what if I was in his shoes? Would I pick that tortoise up and sell it? And you'd have to be really strongly motivated not to do that. You'd have to have an ironclad conservation ethic not to do that. So, yeah, I think, that's one way we should attack the problem is, drive the demand down.
Yeah. And is the captive demand for the species mostly in other Asian countries, namely China, or is that here, like a lot in, say, like Europe, America, the West, or is it all around that this pressure is coming from?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't keep up with the illegal trafficking. But we have recovered them in Thailand. We've recovered them in China. We have some we're pretty sure ended up in Canada, and we know they're also illegal. Not our tortoises, but there are illegal star tortoises floating around in the United States, and there's demand from Europe as well. So it's wherever you got tortoise, keepers that have money, that's the tortoises are ending up there. But I think our biggest, most recently we had some stolen at gunpoint by an armed group, and those went in. We know they went into China because they were recovered about within 2 months. They started turning up there, and the Chinese. We have a program in China, and the Chinese authorities, contacted us, and and we were easily able to identify the tortoises. Unfortunately, a lot of them, there's still a lot we never account for, but sometimes the ones we account for have already died. That's how they're detected. Border guards will smell something and then find a tortoise all taped up. So yeah, there's a pretty high, in transit mortality among these smuggled tortoises as well.
Okay. And switching gears a little bit back to the big head turtle. When you say the name, for some reason, I just think of a musk turtle. But can you give a description of what those guys look like?
Yeah, that it's funny too because my first time I ever saw one years ago, I was like, "That's a musk turtle with a giant head." They had that low dome carapace and this massive head, which I suspect has evolved to crush mollusks. But they have a very long tail, and they have a much reduced plastron, and they're very agile. I've seen videos of them running down chasing crabs, and they climb. They're found in rocky streams, and they'll climb over rocks. And when we had that big confiscation, we had this pond, cement pond, and it was the walls weren't vertical, but they were fairly they were at a very steep angle. And then there was a chain link fence around it. It was designed to keep soft shell turtles. And so we had them in there, and we had them under you can't, keep two of them together because a lot of times they'll fight. So we had to segregate them under these different bamboo baskets. Remember, we had almost 1,000 of these turtles in, and some of them were getting out of those baskets, and you'd look, and they had climbed up halfway up that chain link fence. And we've got some photographs of them climbing up these fences. But they're very agile turtles, and much more agile than you would expect a turtle could ever be. But I think it's just because they live in steep, high gradient, rocky streams.
Yeah, I was gonna say, they almost sound like a miniature snapping turtle, with a long tail and all.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the tail is it's not as long as the body, but it's close. When you see those little hatchling snapping turtles with the tail wrapped around, but then as they get older, the tail it becomes less of proportionally less of the body length. And in platysternin, it doesn't. The big-headed turtles, it just stays long, and they use that as a counterbalance. When they'll be going up those rocks, they'll use that tail to brace themselves and keep them from falling backward.
So they use their tail kind of like how some monitor losers will tripod with theirs, almost.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, and you mentioned that you've seen like hunting crabs, chasing crabs down, but is the majority of their diet like gastropods or not gastropods, arthropods or other invertebrates?
Yeah, I'm not really sure with the ones we have because we try to feed them. We feed them mostly fish because it's easy for us to get. But there has been some work on that was done in Hong Kong. I believe Jonathan Fong, a friend of mine, was one of the co-authors on those papers. And they looked at diet, and they eat a surprising amount of fruit. They're probably pretty important seed dispersers in those streams. But yeah, it was kind of, I remember right, they're kind of a generalist diet: mollusks, fish, the fruit. So really, whatever insect larvae, whatever they can catch. I mean, the ones in captivity, they don't do much. We don't have them in big pens. But my impression is that in the wild they're quite active. I mean, they don't just sit there and wait for something. They're really active foragers and work the streams.
Okay, and how large do these guys get?
The biggest ones we have are like a small chalydra or something. They're not huge. I mean, most of them are much smaller than that. But there are some of them get fairly big.
Okay. So switching gears again, switching from turtles to crocodiles. You mentioned you're doing captive propagation work with Siamensis, and I haven't had an episode yet talk about Siamensis, so it's high time I check that species off the checklist of the podcast. Talk about your work with them in, you said it was Laos?
Yeah, we did a little Siamese crocodile work here in Cambodia, but where we're doing the Badagear Affinis work, there are Siamese crocodiles there, and we were looking for nests, found a few. Last one we found, 2021, it was full of infertile eggs, and I haven't seen another one since then. But in Laos, there's a population near Savannakhet in central Laos. Savannakhet's on the Mekong River. There's some wetlands. It's actually a Ramsar site, about a 45-minute drive, east of Laos, and the Zhejiang Pond. And there's some really extensive wetlands, and there's a population of Siamese crocodiles in there. And like I said earlier, the locals, what they believe is that the crocodiles are an embodiment of their dead ancestors. And so if you do anything to harm the crocodile or upset it, something bad could happen to you. I mean, you could even die, get sick and die, or have an accident. They take that stuff seriously. And so, and that's they've been pretty much extirpated elsewhere in Laos. That's about the only, certainly it's the only viable population that we know about. And so we started working with them in 2011, and we don't do any captive propagation. What we do is we go out into the swamps and we find their nests, and then we collect the eggs, we bring them back and incubate them, and then we head start them for what do we do? 32 months, almost 3 years, right under 3 years. And then by then they're pushing, 70 to 90. Some of them are even over a meter long. And then we release them back into the wetlands. And what we did, there's a few villages around the periphery of the wetland. And so we have teams in the villages, and the villagers kind of divide up the wetlands. I can fish here. If you're from this village, you fish in this area. And so in that area where they're responsible for, they go out and look for, crocodile nests. We also look for the nests with drones, but the villagers find, we don't want, rely too much on the drones because we need to keep the villagers involved. And it's interesting, too, when we go collect the crocodile eggs, we just can't walk up and take the eggs. They actually kill a pig and cook a pig. And then, we have to have this ceremony. So it's been kind of frustrating. Some days you're out there and we'll, collect in one nest, then we'll find another one. Oh, we got to do the ceremony. And so we have to go. I don't mind going out there the next day. It's just, we could kill two birds with one stone, but got to have another ceremony. And so, they do that and they pray. The guy that I call him a crocodile whisperer because he can speak with the crocodile spirits, and it's like speaking in tongues. It's not, it's not loud that nobody can understand him, but he's supposedly talking goes like in a trance, talks to the female, and we go and they tell us, you can't take all the eggs. And so it just depends on who you're working with. We have to leave some of them in the nest, but usually no more than 1, 2, 3. And sometimes, we'll find infertile eggs, which is normal in crocodile nests. And they'll say, well, just leave the infertile ones behind. She doesn't know the difference. And so this year we were so successful. And we bring them back. We have these battery type pens where we head start them. And hell, we were at capacity. And so this past year, the year before, we had something like over 100 hatchling crocodiles. We were just pretty much swamped in them. And so this year I was like, well, let's, we're going to only take half of each clutch and leave the rest in there to incubate naturally. I was kind of curious as to, what happens to these, flooding predators, what's going on. We just didn't know. And so we, collected the eggs. We left half of them in each clutch and put up camera traps. And sure enough, out of, I think one nest we lost to flood, was dead when we got there because the water had come up. We had a typhoon. But the other nests, all of them were lost to either predators, and we're not sure what predators, but I'm pretty sure they were rats. These large, beautiful rats are golden colored. They're quite large. You see them on top of the nest, and I think they ate some of the eggs we found. Looked like they had been gnawed open by rats, or the nests were flooded. But we had one nest that produced hatchlings, and we had pictures of the females taking them out of the nest. But it was interesting because that female is one that we had hatched from an egg in 2013, and we released her in 2015, and then we found her first nest in 2024, and then last year came back and nested exactly the same spot in 2025. So I'm kind of looking forward to maybe I'm going to see her again this year. But she's one of ours, and she was the one that had the successful nest. So. It was really, really interesting, but it's been quite a successful, all the villagers that, when they participate, they're kind of like their crocodiles. And, we assist them, we pay them a stipend to work, go out and look for crocodiles. And it's kind of like, they're always out in the wetland. They're kind of boots on the ground. If somebody comes in from the outside, they'll know about it. And so it's proven to be a really effective program. Nowadays, we go out there and we fly the drone. Now, like I was telling you earlier, I'm not a very tech savvy person, but I have this young lady that flies a drone. I call her my drone Jedi, and she's really good. And we used to almost never see the crocodiles, and we would walk into the nests, and you could see, well, female's been here, but we never see her. Once or twice we had them defend their nest, but we never. And then we started flying that drone, and man, we'll get to, before we go to the nest, we'll put the drone up, and almost invariably the female is right there guarding the nest. But Sudanta, that's her name. She, like I say, I call her my drone Jedi, and she'll fly over those wetlands and just pick out these. I don't know how she does it. Pick out these tiny crocodiles down in the lily pads. And, some of these big wetlands now, she can put the drone up, even if it's not anywhere near a nest, and she'll start finding crocodiles. So I think, we're getting pretty good survival rates. And, the crocodiles are out there now. And so, I think it's been a successful, continues to be a very successful program.
Okay. And for those who aren't familiar with the species, can you give a brief description of Siamensis and kind of how they differ from the other croc species in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, the only other, they're a large crocodile. They'll get up about a little over 3 meters. Again, it's a very poorly known species. They don't, they're not large. They're fairly large. They're not aggressive. That's the thing. I don't know if they were aggressive in the past and just all the aggressive ones got killed. But they're, other than the females around their nests, there are very few records of any attacks or man-eating incidents. There's a crocodile attack database that Brandon Seidelou runs, and most of the records, I haven't checked it recently, but most of the records the few records he's got for Siamese crocodiles are over 100 years old, and they may not have even been Siamese crocodiles. Some of them were, if I remember right, some of them were around Bangkok, which is, at that time could have had saltwater crocodiles. But that's the only other really big crocodile that occurs in this area of Southeast Asia, the saltwater crocodile. And other than the size difference, the way you tell the saltwater from the Siamese quick and dirty way is that saltwater crocodile doesn't have any post-occipital scutes. And whereas Siamese crocodiles generally have about, I think it's four of them. Yeah, I believe it's 4. But they've got post-occipital scutes. And they do hybridize in captivity. I suspect they hybridized in the wild too in the past, because the saltwater crocodiles, they're up in the Tonle Sap, or were in the Tonle Sap in Cambodia, which is very, very far inland, and which we know there were wild Siamese crocodiles there at one time. So there was probably some low level of introgression between the two species. I don't think saltwater crocodiles ever got up into Laos where we are, but we have to be careful because there are lots of, there's less than 1,000 Siamese crocodiles in the wild. It's probably more now, but in captivity, there's probably over 1 million of Siamese crocodiles and hybrid crocodiles. And so when we get animals to do reintroduction projects out of the farms, we have to be extremely careful that we're not getting hybrid animals. And you can't think. I know there's some people that claim they can do it, but they've never showed me, to my satisfaction, how to phenotypically distinct, looking at a crocodile and tell whether it was a hybrid or not. So I don't trust anything except genetic results. But we don't do that because we're not reintroducing crocodiles into the wild. And some people have said that the population we're working with may actually be contaminated with hybrid genes, but I'm leery. I don't know how they came to that conclusion. And, if they are there, I mean, this is a wild population. I don't know how they would have gotten contaminated, but if they are, what are we supposed to do about it? It's an ethical, philosophical difference to me. Those crocodiles, they look like Siamese crocodiles, they act like Siamese crocodiles, and they're doing what Siamese crocodiles are supposed to do in the environment, being an apex predator. That meets all my criteria, and if they're hybrids, so be it. We'll leave them out there. And we know there's a wild hybrid swarm of crocodiles here in Cambodia on the Tonle Sap. But the only way to really address that would be to release just massive or large numbers of Siamese crocodiles and just swamp those hybrid genes out there. But I think it's more important to have the crocodiles in the environment being apex predators than to, quibble about the genetics. I'm not saying release um, hybrid crocodiles into the wild, but if they're out there and you never go out, you never be able to just logistically remove them out of the wild. It's not going to happen. So,
Yeah.
that's how to go about, addressing that.
Yeah, I was about to say, if it walks like Siamese, swims like a Siamese, bellows like a Siamese, I'm going to call it Siamese.
Exactly. And I
Uh,
know people take an issue with that, but yeah, that's just my personal philosophy.
yeah. Uh, that's like saying trying to sort out humans based on how much Neanderthal DNA we have. It's like it's theirs, hasn't changed us too much, so why should it hear about it?
Exactly. Or the American bison too. I mean, there's some bison we know that they've or got cattle genes, and there's I've kind of read up on that issue because it really applies to crocodiles. But some of the cattle, the bison that have cattle genes, you could eliminate them from the herd, but they have alleles, bison alleles that aren't found in any of the other bison. So you'd also, if you really, eliminate them, you'd also eliminate those, rare alleles, which are probably important. So yeah, I don't, like you say, if it looks like a bison and acts like one, it's a bison.
Yeah. Uh, so I've worked a little bit with Siamese in captivity, but I've heard from other keepers like they're not quite on par with Cuban crocs. They do have somewhat pronounced squamosal ridges. Is that true? In your
Yeah,
wild ones?
that's a good point. Yeah, those are really, they'll jump out at you the first time you see them.
Yeah. I've also heard from captive keepers that out of all the true crocodiles, they are the most vocal. Not as vocal as American alligators because nothing likes to chat like an American alligator, but they're more vocal than, say, like a salty or a Nile or something like that.
Yeah, I've not heard them vocalize in the wild, but it's funny you should mention that because we've got a program with the zoo in Laos. We just started, and we're putting up recorders in their crocodile pens, and we're going to do the whole record the calls and look at the I don't know what you even call it, but look at the structure of the calls and what does this mean? How do we interpret that in relation to the behaviors? But yeah, I've heard they're in captivity. They're pretty vocal, and the keepers at the Lao Zoo tell me that they're going all during the breeding season. They're going all day long. Even visitors are there, and they're still sounding off.
Yeah. And when is their breeding season in Laos?
It's That's a really good question. I've been trying to resolve that. In Cambodia on the farms, we published a paper back, I think it was in 2010, and we looked at a lot of aspects of reproduction and captivity on the farms here. And here on the farms, they start breeding in February and then picks up in March. And I know just right now I was talking to some of the guys at another wildlife sanctuary, and they've got nests in March. And then they go into June. But in Laos, we've not seen a nest earlier than mid-May, which is, and I don't know why there's this disparity between the wild and the captive populations, or if that's even real. Maybe it's just, we're only looking at 9 nests out there, and just by chance, they all go down during that period. But consistently, middle of May, early May. I think last year we had one in early May up until about late June, and they all hatch out in August and September. And the time it's important because the rains start in May, and so it does seem you'll get some before the rains, but those early heavy rainfalls seem to be what they cue on. And when the hatchlings come out, the water is coming up, and so that's flooding vegetation. So it's kind of a trade-off. You don't want to nest too late because then your nest will flood, but you want to nest so where your young come out when the water's coming up and they can get into this vegetation because that's where all the insects are, which they probably, is probably an important part of their diet. I know when I work with Morlet's crocodile, they're really cued into the rainfall down in Belize. And then it'd be dry. You'd be going out to all those islands and looking. You couldn't find anything. And at first, when I was studying them, I didn't know that. I was just like, I was really discouraged. I'd been out there almost a month. I couldn't find a nest. And boy, the rain started. And within a week, you were finding crocodile nests all over the place. It's not that dramatic with Siamese crocodiles, but it is. They do. I think those rains really trigger them and get them nesting. And the same thing here in Cambodia along the river we work. We found about 5 nests. They were all went down in early. I think it was late May and early June. But again, that was only 5 nests over about a 5-year period. So, maybe we just need a larger sample size of wild nests to be able to say for certain.
Yeah. So you mentioned that there's probably less than 1,000 wild Siamensis, but it's probably north of 1 million in captivity. I'm guessing that's mostly in like skin farms. Am I right about?
Yeah, all commercial. So the belly skin is really valuable. So there's a huge industry in Thailand, also here in Cambodia as well.
Okay. And is there any degree of cooperation between these farms and conservation efforts?
Yes and no. For the most part, the IUCN Crocodile Specialist Group encourages what we call ranching, which is used with a number of species quite effectively, where you collect the eggs from the wild, you hatch them out. Those are your animals you rear in captivity, and they get to be a certain size, and then you put a certain percentage. I think in Louisiana, they put back, 5% of what they harvest back into the wild. Florida, I believe, does the same thing. And so, the industry is not divorced, so to speak, from the wild population. But here they don't do that, because there is, and you really have to have really good governance and tight regulations to be able to do that successfully, whereas, people don't cheat. A really good book, Gator Country, I think was the name of it. It was about, alligator farming industry in Florida and how people were cheating in this big undercover operation. Where a lot of alligator farmers got arrested. But, here that would never happen. People would just pay off the police. And so here you have the farms. A farm, which is different from a ranch, is a closed cycle. So they have their breeding, populations there on the farm. But a lot of those farmers are actually interested in conservation. In fact, some of the efforts in Thailand are I don't want to say they're being led by crocodile farmers, but the crocodile farmers have been very vocal in their support of the conservation efforts of getting crocodiles back into the wild. And same here in Cambodia. I know there's several farmers that have supplied genetically pure crocodiles for breeding programs. Not us. We don't do that. We're not really doing much crocodile stuff here, but for some of the other conservation NGOs. So yeah, the crocodile farmers, do play a role in crocodile conservation.
Okay. So with Siamensis having such a reduced wild population, I'm guessing their range has become a lot more restricted from what it was historically.
Yeah, we don't really know where they were found historically, but if you look at the map now, they're in the action plan that the Crocodile Specialist Group publishes. They'll show the Southeast Asia, and it's just all yellow, and then where they were formerly found, and then the current populations are just little dots, just a scattering of dots around. And so, yeah, it's another big problem is that there are wild populations, but none of them are really interconnected. They're all isolated from each other. So hopefully, one of these days, it's hard to see how this will ever happen, but we could, connect some of these dots. Maybe we could ever get crocodiles back into the Tonle Sap. That's the largest freshwater wetland in Southeast Asia, and you could have a population of crocodiles in there conceivably in the hundreds of thousands. And you could also, once they're out there, you could, if you had the proper governance structures in place, you could do the egg harvests and the rearing in captivity and do all that. But there's a lot of resistance, among the government, to releasing crocodiles into the Tonle Sap. So I don't see that, unfortunately happening anytime soon. But it's kind of interesting because there's all these floating farms out on the lake and these floating villages. And I'm sure we know there are a few crocodiles out there, and I'm sure those are farm escapes, that are getting. So there's kind of like this bleeding off of these farms. There's trickle and, involuntary reintroduction where, Siamese crocodiles or possibly hybrids are going back into the wild. So maybe one day those crocodiles will start reproducing.
Yeah. So I can't remember if this is true or not, but I think I remember reading somewhere that there is a pocket of Siamensis on Sumatra, or are they just restricted to the mainland?
Yeah, no, they're on Borneo, in the Messengat, Lake Messengat, which is really just a big peat swamp. And I went there, I think it was in 2017, and you can't. It was really. I've never seen insects that bad in my life. They were just horrendous. But it's a very difficult area to survey because it's just flooded vegetation. And you do a spotlight survey and you go through. Normally, those work really well in rivers when you know how many kilometers you've gone, how many crocodiles you've seen. But there, you could see crocodiles. We saw some, but it's very difficult to try to quantify that. I mean, what about the crocodiles that are 5 meters away in that vegetation that there's no way you're ever going to see? And the only way to really do that is to count nests. You could fly over and look for the nest, the mound nest. That's how they survey alligator populations in Louisiana and Florida. They just do aerial nest counts. So along the whole, Gulf Coast, all through the wetlands of Louisiana, they just fly aerial transects and count the nests and look at fluctuations from year to year. And you could do that. It's a vast area there. And nobody knows how many crocodiles are in there. And that population count, 1,000 worldwide, that could be, order of magnitude off base simply because there may be so many Siamese crocodiles in there that, that we just can't count. And when I was there, we flew a fixed wing drone over, we did transects, but I think we were flying too high. We're not even sure when they really nest there. And a lot of it's, closed canopy swamp forest. You wonder if there's a nest under there. I'll never see it. And so it was interesting to do. And I think unfortunately we didn't do much follow up because I think you could do it. You just have to do, fly lower and adjust the protocols. I think it's certainly doable, but that's the only way we'll ever, as far as I'm concerned, we'll ever determine how many crocodiles are in that swamp. It's beautiful habitat, but I suspect it harbors a pretty big population.
Okay. So besides turtles and crocodiles, do you do any other research or conservation work with any other reptile species like snakes or lizards at all?
No, not officially. But yeah, we do some. Not really conservation. I mean, we'll go out and gather observations and get some life history data whenever opportunistically. But yeah, we don't really have any. I mean, WCS has other programs. Wildlife Conservation Society has other reptile conservation programs. It's just not. I'm not involved with them. We're not doing them here.
Okay. So before we wrap up, is there anything else you would like to discuss?
No, not that I think. I think we pretty much covered it all.
Okay. So is there a way for people who are listening to the show to support the WCS or the Turtle Survival Alliance?
Yeah. Both organizations are really worthwhile. WCS is a massive organization, and we do have, we have a website you can check out, Wildlife Conservation Society, and there is, donate, a way to donate money. And same with Turtle Survival Alliance. They're much smaller. They're restricted. WCS does, all sorts of conservation, mammals, birds, whatnot. But Turtle Survival Alliance is focused on turtles. A really good organization. My wife actually works for Turtle Survival Alliance. They're a partner organization, and you can donate to specific projects or contact them. One thing about donating, making donations to any NGO for conservation work, a lot of times, if there's a particular project that you want your money to go to, you have to specify that, and specify that you want all of the money to go into the field. Into field operations or field work, and they're required by law to do that. So yeah, that both organizations are really good. We're always short of funds. But if you're, you can select a project you're interested in, and there are other conservation NGOs. I plug the ones I work for, but there are other ones out there that can certainly, conservation all over the world is just chronically underfunded.
All right. Well, once again, thanks for coming on the show. It's a blast learning about Southeast Asian turtles and Siamensis.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. I'm really privileged to be here and enjoy talking to you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Crocodiles can always use good press.
Well, I think they are one of the coolest animals on the planet. So
yeah, same here. We're obviously biased, but yeah, I would agree with you.
They at least got 2 fans. So
it's true.
All right. Once again, thanks for coming on the show.
Okay. Talk to you later then.